Kicking off the list at number 10, SOUVENIR Symbiote. So during the events of 1984's Secret Wars, Spidey came across a symbiote while on Battleworld. In issue 7, Spider-Woman makes her grand entrance, and Peter Parker reacts in his usual manner. I mean, one of his first thoughts is to sue her for infringing on his shtick, but he clocks that she just tossed a boulder as easily as he could, so maybe there's more behind her than meets the eye. In the next issue, he gets an up-close personal look at this new black suit Spider-Woman was rocking, and now we have a new costume for Spidey, and he loves it. He feels stronger, he feels quicker, and he's even impressed by the mechanics of the suit's ability to change. So while it all seemed like the perfect aid in this massive battle, Peter questioned why his new suit was so different after all. Oh well, he says, and then he returns to Earth with his new suit that just happens to activate his Spidey sense. And we all know that there was much more to this suit than we thought. You gotta leave things where you find them, Pete. You never know, they might just be, I don't know, an alien race. And before we go on to number 9, if you guys could go ahead and give us a like on this video because it helps the channel out a lot over here. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to some more Spider-Man mistakes. Number 9, I am Spider-Man? Yeah, super identities are meant to be super secret, okay? So when Tony Stark announced that he was Iron Man on the big screen, I mean, sure, it was a cool moment, but since then, there have been numerous people trying to take him down. During the events of Civil War issue 2, Spider-Man decides to take a page out of Tony's book and announces to the world who the web-slinger really was. So later on, we see a bullet that was aiming for MJ, but ended up hitting Aunt May instead, resulting in one of the best Spider-Man arcs ever, the Back in Black storyline. So while it's cool to see Peter rage out and get payback wearing nothing but a polo and cool pants, all that pain could have been avoided if you just kept your mask on and your mouth shut. Number 8, the deal with the devil. Next up on our list, we have One More Day. The story began in 2007 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 544. We see Spider-Man make a deal with the devil, Mephisto. So after Spider-Man revealed his identity in the Civil War storyline, that bullet hit Aunt May, which I just talked about, but that's not the end of it. Yeah, the devil shows up and offers a deal to Peter while Aunt May is currently dying from said bullet. So MJ adds to this massive pitch. So basically what ends up happening is that the world will forget about Peter's identity. Aunt May will live, but in order for that to happen, MJ and Peter never got married. Kind of like in Shrek 4, for all the 9 people that watch Shrek 4. So they hug one final time and MJ explains that their love was always meant to be and that whatever Mephisto does is unstoppable. And then poof, the deal is sealed. The next day, Peter's like, oh man, another uneventful night, just the way I like it. And that fast, all that backstory was just wiped out at the turn of one page. And readers at this point were also forced to suffer and join alongside this horrible end to this horrible deal. Number 7, homesick. So now is a time more than ever when we have to be careful about spreading any virus, right? So you would think when Peter gets bitten during, say, I don't know, a zombie apocalypse, he would stay as far away from his loved ones as possible. In Marvel's Zombies Army of Darkness, we see our heroes run into Ash Williams, traveler between worlds. And he's arrived with the Necronomicon, warning him that the army of the dead will rise in this world. So Peter sees this firsthand beside Ash, and he decides he's not going to let any more innocents die on his watch. And then in the next issue, after being bit himself, Peter pretends to munch on Hawkeye's brains before making a daring escape. Not a bad idea. So he gets Ash to safety, explaining why he's still a human being. And then Spidey decided to go home and make sure that May and MJ were okay with this bite and first-hand experience as to what happens. And Peter's newfound appetite starts to kick in. You should have stayed away, Peter. This went from bad to worse real quick. Number 6, not worth the fight. So we have Peter Parker, but this time from Earth 982, aka the MC2 universe, which is my personal favorite. Wonder why. So after a battle with the Green Goblin, Peter ends up losing his entire left leg. And at the start of this issue, he reflects on how much he loved his newborn daughter, saying he wanted to spend every waking moment with her and MJ. But he had other responsibilities. At least he thought he did. His words, not mine. So when May was 2 years old, he got into a fight with the Green Goblin and ended up losing a leg because of it, ending his days as the web-slinger. Now it's great in one way because we get to see May Parker rise to the occasion and put on the suit herself, and she's totally badass while she does it. But to think how differently their lives would have been had Peter have just retired and, I don't know, focused on his family, it would have been a lot different. So while Peter is walking around with a fake leg and cane, she's swinging around busting arms dealers. Let's just hope she comes across a, I don't know, leg dealer. Number 5, too much fun. I mean, sure, saving people can be a blast, swinging through the air, doing flips, talking the entire time to bad guys, but when you find yourself totally comfortable in any job, that's when mistakes happen, when you're not paying full attention. And we see this unfold in a brutal way in Spider-Man issue 17, titled At the Hands of Thanos. So he's going over the mental checklist of things to do in his Spider-Man day, like pick up Mary Jane, and no, not that kind. Fill up on web fluid, you know, usual Spidey stuff. When suddenly a couple workers fall off the side of a building, Peter even acknowledges that this is just another walk in the park for him. He saves them, but the cooling machine falls and then explodes, sending Spider-Man hurling in the air, killing Peter Parker. Now, believe me, that sounds terrible and all, but it gets worse. Yeah. Death isn't the end, and especially in the world where Thanos is around. He meets Peter in the afterlife and makes him watch as a mother yells in agony over the loss of her child during that same explosion. So not only did Spider-Man get himself killed trying to save the woman and her daughter, but he didn't even save the kid. I mean, maybe if you weren't so focused on the barbecue sauce, things would have turned out differently. I don't know. I'm just saying, I don't know. Number 4, a helping hand. It's always fun giving one of your favorite teachers help during a project. I mean, giving them a hand though, literally, could end up pretty bad. So in the comics, Dr. Curt Connors lost his arm due to an explosion during a war and started to spend his life researching on new ways to grow it back. So once this finally happened, there were a few side effects. And as we see in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, Dr. Curtis Connors becomes a lizard man. And no, not like a lizard man. He becomes a lizard man. Like he's a giant lizard. Sorry, what happened? I mean, sure, lizards can grow back their tails easily, but when you add that in with a human driven by rage, the brain can alter as well. So his story arc begins with the Amazing Spider-Man 6, if you want to see that nightmare take place. Number 3, silence is golden. How many girls does Spider-Man have in these comics? Well, that's a tricky question, because Spider-Man and Peter Parker are different people. They're perceived differently by others, specifically Black Cat. Black Cat, being a known burglar, is met by Spider-Man in the night, and she knows he's attracted to her, and she digs the webhead as well. I mean, look at him, who doesn't? All that confidence, all that lankiness, you gotta. In Amazing Spider-Man issue 194, we see the two of them get pretty flirty and even exchange a kiss. But when Black Cat finds out who Spider-Man really is, she's actually less interested. Come on, Pete, you gotta play it cool. Be that mysterious guy. Number 2, the spider or the man. We now go to Amazing Spider-Man issue 100 back in 1963. The issue begins with Peter Parker wanting to dismiss his abilities. I mean, I'll take them off your hands gladly if you wanna just, toss those to the side, sure. So he thinks it's a great idea to drink the solution that he's had that would get rid of his superpowers. Just in case he wanted to, I don't know, get rid of superpowers for some reason. For Gwen, he says, before downing the mix. And as you could have guessed, it doesn't work at all. Well, kind of. I mean, he grows 4 extra arms, so, take that what you will. Not like this, he says. Oh yeah, homemade vaccine for the win. And finally, number 1, not my problem. In a list full of mistakes, I think it's only fair to end on the mistake that haunts Peter the most. After letting a thug out of his sights, that thug ended up being the one to take his Uncle Ben's life. So not only did Peter, of course, feel saddened by this tremendous loss, especially not having parents in the first place, but he was responsible for letting this thug get away, and he honestly just let it happen. And it all takes place in Amazing Fantasy issue 15. Oh yeah, we see this mess go down right here. So after a police officer asks Spider-Man why he let the crook get in an elevator and make a break for it, Spider-Man responds in a sassy way with, "Sorry pal, that's your job. I'm through being pushed around by anyone. From now on, I just look out for number 1. That means me." Sounds like a great plan, Pete. So how did that end up again?
Coming in at number 10, we have Spider-Wolf. Now, not a whole lot is known about this version of Spider-Man or his origin other than that he hails from Earth 13,989, a universe that is a little bit more gothic and assumed to be home to a number of werewolves. Now, the Spider-Man of this universe is no exception, but you probably already guessed that based off of his appearance alone. Going by the name Spider-Wolf, he has all the normal powers you would normally associate with Spider-Man, combined with the strength and the speed of a werewolf, which, as one can imagine, would make him incredibly powerful and a little bit scary to be around. Realizing this, the villain Karn sought out to defeat Spider-Wolf before he was recruited by the heroes of the Spider-Verse, as he could have been one of the Spider Army's most powerful allies. Karn is successful in taking him out for good before moving on to the other Spider-Folk in hopes of outsmarting the Spider Army. Created by Dan Slott, this is unfortunately all we know about this version of Spider-Man. Maybe we'll see him again in the future, who knows, but why not check him out for yourself in their first and last appearance in 2015's Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 11. Number 9, we have Man-Spider. Now, there have been multiple iterations of Man-Spider throughout the years, such as the one that appeared in 1982's Marvel Fanfare number 1, when Spider-Man was exposed to a machine that turned people into primitive monsters, making him the Man-Spider, or in 1971's The Amazing Spider-Man number 100, when Peter tried to cure himself of his powers, but instead mutated them further, giving him 6 arms. I want to focus on Peter Parker, who is Earth 6078, because although his story isn't dark full of murder, it is dark as in he loses what makes him the lovable hero. Now in this iteration, Peter gains his powers in a similar manner to ours, but Aunt May dies in an accident instead of Uncle Ben. This, for some reason, leads Peter to reveal his powers to his uncle, asking him to be his showbiz manager. And needless to say, like many talented folk, Peter ended up getting a very big head and started neglecting his duties as a hero, showing off his powers for fame and profit instead, while other heroes took care of the villains. Now this caused some serious strain on his relationship with Uncle Ben, and it eventually got to the point where they stopped talking, and Peter just sends him money now out of habit to feel less guilt. Check out the sad excuse of a Spider-Man in his first appearance in 2006's Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man number 8. Number 8, the Imperfect Spider-Man. Coming to us from the critical flop Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects, we have Earth 50,701's Peter Parker, and from what we see, he is basically Earth 616 Peter Parker with a bit of a darker twist. Now if you're not familiar with the plot of this video game from 2005, that is absolutely okay. You did not miss very much, and it was not a good game at all. In the story mode, we see Spider-Man, the Thing, Wolverine, and Elektra captured and injected with a drug developed by an alien scientist that corrupted them and turned them into bloodthirsty killers. The now brutally violent and eager to fight heroes face off against each other in a Coliseum type battle. Thankfully, it didn't last long before Spider-Man was able to fight the drug and escape, leading the fight against a group called the Imperfects that had been infected with the same drug. Now, obviously they come out on top because it would make for a pretty terrible story if they didn't. Although this game was a massive flop, it did spin off into a very interesting series called Marvel Nemesis The Imperfects, and within 6 issues they did a better job of explaining exactly what happened in that universe. So if you're curious, check out this limited run for yourself, or honestly, if you're a fan of bad video games and you still have a GameCube lying around, maybe try and find the game. Number 7, Spider-CYBORG. On the apocalyptic Earth 2818, operating in the year 2099 AD, we have a slightly darker version of Peter Parker, who alongside his spider abilities, gains some cybernetic enhancements as well. Equipped with cybernetics covering most of his body, giving him stronger legs, metallic claws, enhanced vision, and even a sonic cannon for an arm, this Spider-Man does not come to play. Essentially, Spider-CYBORG was the perfect combination of Marvel Spider-Man and DC Cyborg, making him into one of the most powerful heroes in the Spider-Verse. Now, unfortunately, like many of the other strong alternate Spider-Men, Spider-CYBORG was immediately targeted by the villain Karn due to the threat that he posed. However, the superior Spider-Man appeared just in the nick of time and defeated the villain. Joining forces with the superior Spider Army, Spider-CYBORG attempts to defeat Karn alongside the other Spider heroes, but is eventually destroyed by Deimos when the Inheritors invaded their home base on Earth 928. Now that's all we know about this Peter Parker, which is kind of disappointing because he definitely has a badass backstory, otherwise he wouldn't have so many cybernetic enhancements. If you know anything more about this character, well, let me know in the comments below, but in the meantime, why not check out his first appearance in 2014 Superior Spider-Man number 33. Number 6, Spider-Cy. Believing himself to be the real Peter Parker, this Spidey clone was specifically engineered by the Jackal to kill the real Peter Parker, Ben, Kane, and Mary Jane. As a clone, he possesses many of the same abilities the real Peter has, such as superhuman strength, speed, and wall crawling, and spider senses, but what really sets him apart is his complete control over his molecular structure. With this ability, Spider-Cy is able to extend his limbs, shapeshift, control the density of his body, and so much more. He actually uses this to simulate the artificial webbing used by Spider-Man by turning parts of himself into semi-liquid and just flicking it around. Adopting the name Spider-Cide after the Jackal jokingly said that this Peter would commit mass Spider-Cide for him, he actually followed through and once released a toxin in the air that killed 2,600 people across the state of Pennsylvania. Later, Geyer removes his clone degeneration factor after he betrays the Jackal, and good thing he does because that kept him alive for a little bit longer until he eventually fell off the roof of the Daily Bugle and was put in a stasis chamber, preventing him from ever being a threat again. First appearing all the way back in 1995 as Spider-Cide in New Warriors number 61, check out this clone's short run as part of the Spider family for yourself. Number 5, Peter Parker, Earth 70,237. Many years into the future, we get a glimpse into the life of a retired Spider-Man who now spends his days working in a flower shop. MJ has already passed away due to radioactivity from what I guess I'll refer to as Peter's lovin'. You probably all know what I'm talking about, and there are actually no more heroes or villains around as a new merciless police force known as the Rain control the city. J. Jonah Jameson of all people is actually the one to convince Peter to take up the mantle of Spider-Man once again to free the city from the Rain. However, this is proven to be a very difficult task, as Mayor Waters does whatever he can to stand in his way. Facing off against the elderly Sinister Six, Peter learns to conquer his demons and truly begins his triumphant return as the friendly webhead. As he is a bit older than most Spider-Men, his reflexes are a little bit rusty and he is more vulnerable to attacks despite having his superhuman durability. After an all-out battle with Rain and Venom, who turned out to be Mayor Waters' assistant, Peter comes out victorious and the world goes back to the way it should be, full of heroes and villains. This version of Peter doesn't get to enjoy the return of heroes for long, as he is murdered by Deimos, having his head crushed by Mary Jane's tombstone. If you're interested, check out this alternate Spider-Man in 2007's Spider-Man Reign #1. Number 4, WEBSLINGER. Originating from Earth, spelled EURTH, there was once a young boy who was fascinated by spiders, and as a young man, he dared the journey into the mysterious Web Wood, a place filled with mysterious beings, to meet the mysterious Widow of the Web, because he really just wanted to know more about spiders. Impressed by him, she used her magical abilities to give him all the powers of the Spider Kingdom with one condition attached. He could never use the powers for his own interest. Now, these powers weren't really too much to write home about, considering spiders don't have too much going on for them. He really just gained extra limbs and web generating abilities. Not long after, his uncle was in trouble and the boy ended up using his powers to save him, which really angered the widow, causing her to curse the boy. From that day forward, he lived out his life as a monstrous looking spider-human hybrid. Deciding to isolate himself from society, the boy took up the name WEBSLINGER and became the guardian of Webwood. However, despite all the good he does as WEBSLINGER, he is still seen as no better than the criminals he fights due to his monstrous appearance. Give his story a read for yourself in 2000's Avatar Covenant of the Shield #2. Number 3, we have Spider-Man NOIR. Raised by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben during the Great Depression, this Peter was raised to believe that good could triumph over evil no matter what. Now, gaining his powers after an antique spider statue breaks open and he is bit by a horde of spiders, he awakens the next day with these arachnid-like abilities, such as being able to shoot organic webs from his wrists, spider senses, and of course the signature superhuman abilities of every Spider-Man. Equipped with his signature Spider-Man NOIR suit modeled after his uncle's World War I airman uniform, Peter stealthily moves about in the shadows, taking down baddies with his spider powers and revolvers. This Peter is pretty interesting because in the beginning of his career, he seemed to have no problem killing villains, killing the Vulture before he could murder his Aunt May. But later on, he seemed to grow conscious and instead relied more on his powers than on his firepower. As a member of the Superior Spider Army, we saw him stationed on Earth 928, and he was a fairly key member of the war until he was very badly injured by Bricks and Bora, and had to kinda sit the rest of it out and do whatever he could from behind the scenes. Outside of that storyline, we have seen him fight the likes of his Earth's Norman Osborn and the Chameleon, and we even got to see him in the animated movie Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, where he was voiced by Nicolas Cage. Now, if you're wondering why I included him on this list today, since he doesn't really have a dark attitude to the world, here's why. My reasoning is because he literally grew up during the Great Depression, one of the darkest times in human history, and had to deal with some pretty dark subject matter while fighting the urge to succumb to it. So, I highly recommend you check out Spider-Man NOIR for yourself in his first appearance in 2009's Spider-Man NOIR #1. Coming in at number 2, we have Last Stand Spider-Man. Now, this version of Spider-Man is a possible future Peter Parker that we get to see thanks to Madam Web. In this future, Peter kills Kraven the Hunter to avenge the deaths of Kane and Maddie Franklin, and this sort of flips some switch in Peter because from that point on, he was much darker and deadlier. Adopting a new costume and title as an anti-hero, this version of Spider-Man is kicked out of the Avengers for good and winds up hurting his loved ones so badly, leaving him all alone with no one to worry about. All of his quote-unquote heroic deeds do eventually catch the attention of the police, and he goes on the run as a fugitive. Years later, as an old man, Peter visited his Aunt May's grave, aware that his younger self was actually hiding in the shadows watching his every move. Peter was confronted by the NYPD, and though he was given the choice to surrender and admit to his crimes, he refused and fought against them until he was shot down and killed. Now, I know we've talked about darker versions of Peter that are okay with killing and whatnot, but what sets Last Stand apart is that he seems to eventually realize what he was doing was probably not the best, and he felt the only way to atone for his sins was to actually die. Now, I highly recommend you check the story out for yourself because it is a great read, so head on over to 2003's Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, number 58. And finally, number 1, we have Peter Parker Earth 8351. Known as Assassin Spider-Man, this universe's Peter Parker becomes an assassin working alongside Wolverine. Leaving basically all aspects of his old life behind, including his longtime girlfriend Mary Jane, this Spider-Man is the complete inverse of his 616 counterpart. We later find out during the events of Edge of the Spider-Verse that Peter left his old life behind to protect his loved ones, as he states that with great power comes great responsibility and even greater enemies. Shown to be always serious, lacking his signature quips and jokey demeanor in battle, likely because he has no problem coping with the situation like his mainstream counterpart, this Spidey has shown no qualms about killing and does whatever it takes to get the job done. Now, this is likely due to his friendship with Wolverine, having adapted to his personality to better fit their job style. Having received formal training to hone his skills, this Peter possesses highly refined versions of the Spidey powers we all know and love. The most impressive being his spider senses, which is honed so much that he just seems to know things, even to the point that he knows what's going on before his opponent could think about it. So beating him is nearly impossible to do thanks to this precognition. He's also a master at hand-to-hand combat, able to defeat Black Widow with ease, and a master marksman, able to use any gun he gets his hands on. Added as a member of the Superior Spider-Man's Superior Spider Army, he alongside the other Spider-Men of the multiverse take on Karn. However, he is unfortunately defeated by the likes of Deimos' clone. Appearing for the first time in 2008's What If Spider-Man vs. Wolverine #1, why not check this cold webhead out for yourself?
Kicking off the list at number 10, put on a show. Okay, Peter's life is pretty balanced. I mean, he takes selfies for the Daily Bugle, gets a little bit of cash, gets thrown off a building, has to fight a giant lizard, you name it. With Peter's life, his superhero and work go hand in hand. So in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 4, released back in 1963, we see Peter and he had just finished laying out Sandman. But he forgot to snag a couple of photos of the action. He didn't take any selfies, which is the worst. It's like when you blow candles out on your cake and then your mom's like, nope, you blinked, light them up again. Gotta keep trying this, it's for the scrapbook, let's go. Then you're like, I'm tired. So Peter grabs sand, like just sand off the ground, tosses it up in the air, and then punches through the sand. He's like, yeah, people are gonna buy this, it's the Sandman. And then people do buy it. What a liar. He comes back in all cool, out of breath, like, good people, you can breathe easy. Meanwhile, his Instagram is just popping off with likes. God, what a liar. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. You gotta get clout. You gotta get that super clout. And before we list off some more of Peter's dark days, if you guys could go ahead and toss us a thumbs up, because it really helps us out here at the studio. If we get enough likes, they won't kill me. Number 9, giving away Edith. Following the events of Avengers Endgame, aka the Snappening, we see Peter Parker trying to move on in a very new world, while mourning the loss of a co-worker and father figure that is Tony Stark. He wants to just live a normal life. He wants to go away on a trip with his friends and not have any moons hucked at him from any Titans. So after trying to ghost Nick Fury in the process, he's handed down Edith, Tony's sweet AI glasses. After a mix-up that almost had his classmate executed by one of Tony's drones, he decides that the handsome, caped, random Jake Gyllenhaal that just came out of nowhere as Mysterio is a safe bet for the tech. I mean, he looks great in the glasses, but like, it's Jake Gyllenhaal, he's gonna look great in anything. But come on, Peter, you think after toying with Stark's suit years before that maybe it's a little bit too much responsibility? I'll get into that later. Number 8, the Betty Brant affair.
Hey, Betty.
So Betty is a staff member at the Daily Bugle. She's been played by Elizabeth Banks in the Tobey Maguire trilogy, and Angourie Rice plays a younger version of her in the new MCU Tom Holland version. Believe it or not though, Betty was actually the first woman that Peter was attracted to when he first started selling photos to the Daily Bugle. So they dated for a bit, but ultimately it didn't work out. No biggie, it happens. Cut to years down the road, Peter's marriage proposal didn't work out too well. She said no, and Betty's marriage to Ned at this point was also not working out. She was having a bit of a rough patch. So she went to Peter for some comfort, and then the obvious happened. She's still married, Pete. Don't do it.
The shots are so good.
I'd love to shoot you sometime.
Peter Parker. Peter.
Number 7, more secrets. Marriage is a big deal, as we kind of just mentioned. I mean, maybe in comic books they happen way more often than they should. So many characters get divorced every other day, I swear. Like, divorce lawyers must make millions of dollars in the comics. Holy shit. But the whole point of a proper marriage is to have everything out there on the table, right? You have to know everything about your significant other. No secrets. I mean, sure, if you're Spider-Man, you have to keep some things to yourself, like the fact that you're Spider-Man. Because maybe your friends will go and say something and then the Green Goblin will hear and then he'll blow up your house or something, or toss your aunt out of a window. I get it. But MJ already knew about Peter Parker being Spider-Man. Of course she did. So right after he had resumed taking on the mantle of the webhead again, he failed to fill in MJ. Yeah, he told her he'd quit and then he didn't tell her that he was, you know, not quitting anymore. Like, dude, she already knew before. Stop making up lies. What are you, Walter White? It's very obvious you're up to something. Everybody's onto it. Number 6, blackmail for a date. So that One More Day storyline that has been mentioned before on our channel that I'll talk about a little bit more at the end of this list is a pretty pivotal moment in Spider-Man comics. So after this deal had taken place, Spider-Man was now single and ready to mingle. So in Miss Marvel issue 34, we see a new Peter bump into Miss Marvel. And she's in the middle of this sketchy and totally unplanned mission, as Peter puts it, with the CIA. And she can't use her powers, and she's currently on the run from Norman Osborn, who turned S.H.I.E.L.D. into Hammer at this point. It's wild. So bumping into Peter was pretty ideal at this point. He webbed her to safety, all the while they bickered at each other trying to figure out what's going on, what they're up to, what their real intentions are. And then Carol thanks him with a super knee, bam, right between the legs, and then explains to Peter that she needs his help, which is a good order. That's how you do things in that order. I need help. Can you drive me to the airport? If I do this, says Pete, then I want a date with you, which we see come to fruition 13 issues later. So when Carol responded surprised, he even acknowledged that he didn't realize he was gonna say that until it came out. Cool, maybe it just slipped out. But then once she leaves and agrees to it, he's like, yo, I think I just got a date, score. Come on, Pete. A lot of come on Pete's in this, eh? A lot of just what are you doing, dude? Number 5, truce? Question mark? So at some point it's fair to make a truce, okay? Maybe the conflicts just don't have realistic expectations, and then both parties are like, you know what, this has gone on way too long, let's just call it, no hard feelings. Bam. Like Spider-Man 3, when Pete and Harry teamed up to save the day against Venom and Sandman. That was a great moment. Moviegoers were thrilled to see the end of Bad Boy James Franco and Bad Boy Tobey Maguire. Like, just stop dancing and snapping at people, just fight, I don't know. But in the comics, he made a pretty questionable truce with Venom. And it all happens in the Amazing Spider-Man 375. Spider-Man's parents get kidnapped by Venom. So he's like, no problem, I'll just roll up with your ex-wife. What's up, let's make a deal, what do you got? So Spider-Man saved her life, so in return, a truce was to be made. I mean, sure, this was the kickoff to Venom becoming an anti-hero, and then he can have his own run, but also, it's Venom, you know?
Christineth, are you stupid or are you deaf?
Number 4, the FERRY incident. Spider-Man Homecoming. Okay, so after intimidating Aaron Davis with his cool, deep voice, Spider-Man figured out the next move for the arms dealers. So Pete decides to take matters into his own hands and prove that he's worthy of being a suitable Avenger. See, this was right after Tony recruited him to help take down Team Cap in Civil War. So he was warm, he got a taste of the action, and now he wants to do more. That's fair, that's why we love Spider-Man. So the Staten Island Ferry was the next location for the Vulture's arms deal to go down. Let's do it, we got the intel, we're rolling in. So he says some quips, webs a few bad guys up, but the Vulture's Chitauri weapon was just too much for Peter to handle, resulting in the ferry to split in half. Right down the middle too, not even like Titanic. So in a last attempt to keep the civilians safe, he tries to hold on to both sides, which is a sick moment. It's kind of like a homage to other Spider-Man moments. It's great, but people are in danger. People are about to drown. There's like cars that are sinking. It's bad. And thankfully, with Iron Man's surprise arrival, the passengers were saved. Tony was pissed though. He had this whole setup, there was an inside operation, and then Spidey came in and blew it. And he didn't even tell Tony about what he was doing to make matters all the worse, which resulted in Tony taking back the Spider-Man suit. It's always the worst part, right after a breakup. You're like, fine, here's your nice sweater. God, I'm so cold now. Number 3, Evil Assassin Spider-Man. We go now to Earth 8351, where Spider-Man and Wolverine are training together in Alaska. Nice and cold. So they're trying to go rogue, so they're working on becoming stronger, and they're training, they're having a good time. Now, this Peter Parker, he's a bit more rough around the edges. Even his famous catchphrase is now slightly different. See, in this universe, it is, with great power comes great responsibility and greater enemies, which I like more. It's honest. It's definitely better. Doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's a step in the right direction. And it makes sense why he's going rogue. He's truly trying to protect his friends and family, and saying those few extra words at the end just reaffirms his only goal. So when they're attacked, Spider-Man tells Wolverine just to keep hitting people while he deals with a bad guy wielding not one, but 2 swords. So Spider-Man tries webbing him up, and the swords don't allow that. And Spider-Man even gets laughed at for attempting to do this. And Spider-Man says, you're right, that's not gonna work. Bam, shoots him in the face. Huh? They held off long enough until S.H.I.E.L.D. arrived. Look, I mean, sure, this Spider-Man is a different version, but it's still Spider-Man, right? Like, regardless of the title on the front page, this is a moment most fans remembered long after the pages were closed. He like did a cool peace sign too, and then the bullets popped out his wrist. It was cool. He's like, hey, smell this, bam. Smell this, why the fuck would he say that? Number 2, Hit Mary Jane. Spectacular Spider-Man issue 226, we see Ben Reilly and Peter Parker, and the tension is high. They're trying to prove who the real Spider-Man is. It's during all the clone stuff. And they reach a conclusion that Ben Reilly is in fact the real Spider-Man. He is the real father. He is the father. Peter doesn't respond to this well at all. He's upset, obviously. He's watching his entire life basically get stolen in front of him. And then MJ tries to get in the middle, you know, and cool everything down, and Peter instinctively just brushes her off, yelling to leave him alone. Now, you can't really brush somebody off of you when you can lift, I don't know, a bus. He's strong, he's really strong. So him just doing that in a matter of rage, she went flying. And to make matters somehow worse, she was pregnant. Yeah, she was pregnant. And he quickly knew he had messed up, saying, oh God, what have I done? What kind of man am I? I'll tell you what kind of man you are, Spider-Man. You're a guy who gets on a lot of lists of people getting in trouble. That's what you are. Kidding, you're a gem. Stop hitting people. And finally, number 1. The deal with the devil. I mentioned this earlier, now it's time to get into it. Look, sometimes Peter will try and do the right thing. Well, most of the time he'll do the right thing. But then life just gets even harder for him after that. And then he's presented with a new issue to face, and it's like an over and over again thing. It's just a nightmare. And then in 2007, starting with the Amazing Spider-Man issue 544, the storyline One More Day, it's exactly what might happen if you revealed your identity to the public. Following in the footsteps of Tony Stark in the Civil War II storyline, where Peter revealed his true identity in order to support the Superhero Registration Act. So giving out your last name to supervillains, cool, great idea, awesome, nothing bad's gonna happen at all. This of course resulted in Aunt May getting shot, and in order to save her life, he must make a deal with the devil, literally Mephisto. And in doing so, the world will also forget about Peter's true identity. Not a bad deal. The only catch is that Mephisto takes away the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane. And I don't mean a quickie divorce and he's like, hey, sign here, poof. No, I mean it never happened. Their relationship is gone, and at the turn of a page, the marriage was just no more. All those memories, all those moments, gone just like that.